Hi, everyone. I'm Vladimir Dutip. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. Check out these monitors behind me. If there is news breaking anywhere where CBS News has an affiliate or a station, and even in places that we don't, we're going to bring it to you live right here in Studio 55. Let's begin. Within hours of taking office, President Donald Trump signed a deluge of executive orders and pardoned thousands of rioters who stormed the Capitol during the January 6th insurrection. And he's promising a slew of radical policy changes that he's trying to do without the backing of Congress. We're going to break it down and look at what's to come today. Plus, a rare winter storm is bringing a bitter cold to the south. We're tracking the latest on the potential for dangerous snow and ice. This is CBS News 24/7. Today marks Donald Trump's first full day in office as the 47th president of the United States. He'll sit down with top lawmakers on the Republican side to discuss his legislative agenda. The president wasted no time in his White House return, signing a record number of executive actions and issuing pardons for almost all 1,500 defendants charged in connection with the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol.
Instead of worrying about political agendas, you don't have to worry about that at all. There's only one focus: defeating America's enemies. We're not going to be defeated. We're not going to be humiliated. We're only going to win, win, win.
All right, for more on this, I'm joined by CBS News Chief White House Correspondent Nancy Cordes. Nancy, let's start with those January 6 pardons. Break down this executive order. What exactly does it do?
What it does, Vlad, is wipe the slate clean for virtually all of the 1,600 January 6 defendants. Those who are currently in jail will be getting out of jail if they haven't already. For example, there were two brothers who were just sentenced on Friday to 2.5 years in prison for assaulting police officers. They have already, as of last night, been released from the D.C. jail. There's this small handful of people, a little over a dozen, who were charged with seditious conspiracy, the ringleaders, essentially. Their sentences will be commuted. And so basically what you have here is a decision by President Trump that does not distinguish between those who were violent and those who were not. He's just giving a blanket pardon to everyone involved in what happened that day.
Of course, people shouldn't be surprised, Nancy. He had signaled this throughout the campaign season that he was going to do this. But the question I have is, what's the reaction from not people within his own party, but, for example, police officers, Capitol police officers, and the unions who represent them?
There's a lot of anger, as you can imagine. Michael Fanone, who has been outspoken throughout, he's a former D.C. police officer who was beaten on January 6th. He told CBS News last night that he felt betrayed and that the American people own this, in his words, for electing Trump. The family of Brian Sicknick, who also died in the days after January 6th, they put out a statement saying essentially that this makes a mockery of the U.S. justice system. There are Democrats who have called this obscene. There were Republicans, most notably the new Vice President of the United States, who said that there should be a dividing line and that perhaps those who were accused or convicted of violent acts should not be pardoned. The fact that President Trump did not end up making that distinction has not garnered any kind of reaction from them for the most part yet. You really get the feeling that they didn't want to be criticizing the new commander-in-chief in his first day on the job.
Well, so let's talk about the first day, Nancy, where we now know that some leaders from the GOP are expected to meet with the president later today at the White House. During that slew of executive actions, there was a lot of focus on some of the culture war stuff, renaming Mount McKinley, for example, or Denali back to Mount McKinley, the Gulf of Mexico brouhaha. But I suspect that these Republicans want to talk about, for example, ending the war in Ukraine, which the president said he would do on day one, or perhaps bringing down the price of groceries. How does that figure into some of these discussions?
Right. It's notable that you mentioned Denali, for example, because the state's two Republican senators, Dan Sullivan and Lisa Murkowski, have been against changing the name from Denali to Mount McKinley. And Murkowski put out a pretty harshly worded statement after President Trump made that announcement yesterday, saying that that to Alaskans, it is Denali, and it should stay that way. But nevertheless, according to the president, it is changing. As for the meeting with Republican leaders today, basically this is meant to sort of, all get on the same page. There are some really big things that President Trump and Republicans in Congress want to do right away that are going to require a great deal of coordination if they're going to get it across the finish line in a very closely divided Congress, most notably reinstating the Trump tax cuts, which are set to expire towards the end of this year. So they want to extend those. And they also want to pass legislation that has to do with energy in this country and expanding drilling. So there's a lot on their plate that they'll be talking about today.
And I know you'll be tracking it all for us. Nancy Cordes on a very cold day in Washington, D.C. Thank you, Nancy.
You got it.
All right, I want to bring in CBS News Chief Election and Campaign Correspondent Robert Costa for more on this. Robert, as you know, the president wasted no time in wielding his executive powers. Does that sort of set the tone from what we can expect from the second term? In other words, as you well know, Bob, because you covered it, in the first term, there were people that the president surrounded himself with that were not necessarily loyalists. A lot of them had come from longtime Beltway politics. Here, the people that he has on his team are people that know what he wants, and they're able to execute them. And that's why we're seeing, I guess, this flurry of activity in the early days.
Great to be with you, Vlad. Based on my reporting, it's evident that the people around President Trump now are the types of people who really understand his personality. They know that he wants to be in the center of all executive action and legislative action. They're not trying to nudge him in any direction. They know he's going to take a lot of inputs at time. He will make a round of phone calls to friends, allies, different associates. That's the kind of leader he is. That's how he ran his businesses at Trump Tower. When I would go up and visit him at Trump Tower, it was always Trump at the center, Trump with many spokes coming into the wheel in terms of the management style. And so you don't have a tension now, as you did in 2017, between how Trump wants to run his administration and how others believe it should be run. They're all now following in the wake of Trump himself.
So what other potential actions by the president are you monitoring for, Robert? What can we expect in the next couple of days and weeks?
The important thing to watch is not just the next few days, but the next few weeks and the next few months, because you're seeing this flurry, really a blizzard of executive actions that is defining the early days of this administration on border policy, on how executive agencies are going to be run, how the federal workforce is going to be regulated in the coming years. At the same time, the real action is going to be on Capitol Hill. And while they are narrow majorities, Republicans still have majorities in the House and in the Senate. And when I talk to top Republicans, as I did this past week at the Capitol, it's clear they want this year not just to be about executive orders, but about big legislation on taxes. They want to cut taxes across the board. And they also want to have legislation passed that not only allows the military to have a real presence at the border, but gives a lot more funding in the way Trump wants to handle border security.
All right, we'll be watching. Robert Costa for us this morning. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Today marks week 3 of Senate confirmation hearings, and moments from now, Representative Elise Stefanik will face questions as she looks to become the next U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. President Trump's pick for Secretary of the Treasury and Veterans Affairs are also set to appear in front of lawmakers today. Defense Secretary pick Pete Hegseth mustered approval from the Senate committee on Monday, so he secured the position after being grilled by lawmakers about his assault allegations and his thinking on women in the military. This happened all of last week. Meanwhile, Trump's pick to lead the CIA, John Ratcliffe, also moves closer to confirmation. He's a Trump loyalist, and he has vowed to put intelligence gathering over political biases in the CIA, such as they see it. And Senator Marco Rubio is officially the first confirmed member of the cabinet. The Senate unanimously approved him 99-0 to be Secretary of State. Earlier this morning, Rubio spoke to CBS Mornings about what he has in store.
my singular focus is to ensure that the priority of the United States Department of State is the United States and what's best for our country. And that's what we're going to be focused on. As part of this transition to this new job, I'm not going to be opining or focused on domestic politics, not because they don't matter, but because our focus has to be singularly on how do we secure America's interests all over the world. My first meeting's today. As soon as I walk in the office, we're going to be meeting with the foreign ministers of important allies in Japan and India and Australia.
Rubio also signaled the Trump administration would work quickly to achieve a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. CBS News has an exclusive first look at Ryan Corbett headed back to the U.S. after being held in captivity by the Taliban for more than 2 years. That is this photo that you're seeing right now on your screen. Corbett was abducted by the Taliban while he was on a business trip back in August of 2022. He is one of 2 Americans freed in exchange for a Taliban member who was serving a life sentence in the United States for drug trafficking and terrorism. The Taliban, which runs Afghanistan's government, is holding at least 2 other Americans. All right, let's pivot to weather now. Millions of Americans across the South are bracing for a rare and potentially dangerous winter storm set to bring in snow, sleet, ice, and rain. For now, the bitter cold is taking aim at states all the way from Texas to the Carolinas. So I want to bring in CBS News reporter Katie Weiss, who's tracking the storm from New Orleans. Katie, I can already see, looks like a couple inches of snow on the ground already.
Yes, good morning, Vlad. You know, this is certainly not a sight you would normally see here in the Bayou State. This is a sight that many people across the Gulf Coast are waking up to this morning, and it is definitely something different. As someone who is from this region, it's pretty impressive. It is something, though, that many furry friends are welcoming and enjoying here, who normally are probably battling the heat that we see here in New Orleans. But these guys instead this morning are having a great time enjoying the snow and playing, enjoying a more northern style weather. But certainly this is something that we've been seeing all morning long, all of this snow coming down here in New Orleans. And I know that it's not going to let up. We're expected to see quite significant snowfall accumulation. So definitely people today are going to be staying in. They've been told to shelter in place. So certainly lends for just a nice day to play with the dogs and stay at home, not get out on those icy roads. Vlad?
So Katie, being from the region, what do folks do in the Bayou region when there's a snowstorm like this? What are people telling you? I mean, if you're not used to it, I mean, here in New York City, it's pretty common. But if you're not used to it and you got to drive or you got to get outdoors, it's got to be something.
Absolutely. You know, for many people, when it snows down here on the Gulf Coast, this is a memorable event. It's something you don't forget. You say, do you remember that time it snowed 20 years ago? That was crazy, wasn't it? And that's how this is going to certainly turn out for folks. This is going to be a day that many people will surely never forget. I know kids are going to be at home trying to make little miniature snowmans with a little bit of snow that accumulates. They're going to be having snowball fights, making those snow angels, doing all the things that the southern kids never get to enjoy because they certainly don't get to, you know, experience this very often. They're usually envious of the northern, you know, school kids who get to have this all the time. Like you said, they get so used to it. But also, that's how a kid will look at this. But for the adults, this is something that, you know, is something that they've got to try to prepare as best they can, but they don't have the right equipment many times. Here in New Orleans, the city has more sand spreading trucks, but not, you know, salt spreaders. And so we know that there have been crews that have been coming down, bringing in some salt spreaders. We know that some of the highways have been salted, but other, you know, smaller roads throughout the town, throughout the city are still going to be pretty icy. So that's something that I think the city and many smaller towns across the Gulf Coast are going to be battling through today. So yeah, definitely don't get out on the road if you don't have to.
All right, good advice. Katie Weiss, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the first look at the national forecast. Hey, Grant.
Vlad, look, if it's that cold to produce snow across the Gulf states, you know there's a lot of cold Arctic air that has invaded a good portion of the country. In fact, at last check, 229 million people underneath either a cold weather advisory or that extreme cold warning. Look at some of these current temperatures across the eastern 2/3 of the country. And we'll start with New Orleans, 28 degrees, feels like 16 degrees. And then you've got current temperatures below zero with feels like temperatures. Minneapolis right now feels like 31 degrees below, well, zero, not just below average, below zero. Look at that snow. Man, that's crazy, isn't it? You've got snow falling. You've got blizzard warnings in portions of southwestern Louisiana this morning. First time that's happened, with those winter weather storm warnings all the way up into the Carolinas this morning as that snow advances to the east. Look at the forecast. This is crazy. You're talking about 4 to 6 inches of snow in places like New Orleans, maybe even more than that. Right along that I-10 corridor, 2 to 4 inches in portions of southern Georgia into South North Carolina, closer to the coast, and then maybe just around an inch in places in upstate South Carolina. Northern Florida, Vlad, may get a little bit of snow. Places like Tallahassee potentially picking up 2 to maybe 3 inches of snow. Wild stuff down there.
Indeed. All right, Grant Gilmore for us. Grant, we'll talk with you a little bit later. Thank you. President Trump says he is planning to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin as he vows to end the war in Ukraine. We're going to go there next. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. We are now on the third day of the Gaza ceasefire. While the deal was negotiated under President Joe Biden, implementation now falls on the Trump administration. Yesterday, the president was asked about the deal's longevity. Here's what he had to say.
How confident are you, Mr. President, that you can keep the ceasefire in Gaza and conclude the 3 phases of this deal?
I'm not confident. That's not our war, it's their war, but I'm not confident.
CBS News foreign correspondent Ramy Inocencio is live for us in Tel Aviv this morning. So, Ramy, President Trump has overturned sanctions that came in under the Biden administration on far-right Israeli settler groups and individuals in the West Bank. What does the decision indicate about Trump's stance towards the region, and specifically, how are folks reacting to what he said yesterday?
Sure. Well, people are turning their heads in terms of what he's been saying, because they have seen Donald Trump as someone who has been at least telegraphing very strong support against what has been happening with the Biden administration. But also looking at the raft of orders that he has written, for example, the one you just talked about, rescinding the executive order under the Biden administration with regards to settlers in the West Bank, and basically talking about undermining peace and security. That is just one of many things here. For example, Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, cheered that. We spoke to a settler in one of those settlements a couple weeks ago, and he was telling us that he was satisfied with President Trump. In addition, he was quite excited about the incoming ambassador, or at least tapped-to-be ambassador, Mike Huckabee, who has called himself an unapologetic Zionist. But also yesterday, Mr. Trump restored sanctions on the International Criminal Court, even as he took away sanctions on those West Bank settlers. The ICC had issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu, accusing him of war crimes. Israeli media are also reporting that Trump will lift a Biden-era ban on the supply of one-ton bombs. Trump also suspended all U.S. foreign aid for 90 days, and that's expected to impact Palestinians in particular.
Netanyahu has congratulated Trump on his return to the White House. Do we know if the two are scheduled to speak, or if the prime minister is scheduled to make a visit to the United States?
Sure. No word yet on whether that is going to happen. But in the initial minutes after Trump was sworn in, Prime Minister Netanyahu here issued a video congratulations to Mr. Trump, very effusive, very excited. And then he got down to business, and he basically asked, said what he wanted in terms of trying to get back the rest of the hostages in Gaza. He said specifically to destroy Hamas's military wing. He also rattled off the successes that happened during Trump's first term, with regards to Israeli policy. For example, recognizing controversially the capital of Israel as Jerusalem, and also 4 Arab countries recognizing and establishing diplomatic relations with Israel. The idea there is that potentially they could expand on that here, thereby giving more stability to Israel in the region for the benefit of Israel. There's a lot of hope for change here among Israelis, and including even Palestinians that we've talked to, that even if they don't want Trump, he brings the change that they might want.
Yeah, and I'm still trying to decipher what the president meant when he was asked about Gaza, Ramey, yesterday, and said it's a phenomenal location on the sea, the best weather, beautiful things could be done with it. Some fantastic things could be done with Gaza. I'm sure a lot of people are wondering exactly what that potentially means. We'll have to wait and see. Ramey Inocencio for us in Tel Aviv. As always, my friend, thank you very much. Stay safe. The president says he will meet with Vladimir Putin, and he has urged the Russian leader to make a deal to end the war in Ukraine. Listen.
I have to speak to President Putin. We're going to have to find out. He can't be thrilled. He's not doing so well. I mean, he's grinding it out, but most people thought that war would have been over in about 1 week. Zelensky wants to make a deal. I don't know if Putin does. He might not. I don't know. He should make a deal. I think he's destroying Russia by not making a deal.
Well, no date is set for potential meeting, though the fighting in Ukraine shows no sign of slowing down, with the Ukrainian Air Force reporting Russia has launched more drones and missiles overnight. So joining us now for more from Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, is CBS News senior foreign correspondent Holly Williams. Holly, what are you hearing on the ground right now from sources and from people that you're talking to? The president campaigned on suggesting that he could end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. He alone could do it. We're not any closer to that. And now he's also saying that Vladimir Putin is ruining Russia. What are you hearing?
Hey there, Vlad. Yeah, look, during the campaign, President Trump made it sound really easy, didn't he? He said he could end the war here in Ukraine quickly. He said he could end it in 24 hours. He even said he could end it before he took office, and obviously that hasn't happened. Interestingly, in recent days, we actually heard from Trump's special envoy for the war in Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, who said that they're now hoping to end the war within 100 days. That's obviously a very different time frame. But what we have seen in recent months here in Ukraine, with all this talk from Donald Trump, but without any specifics about how he would end the war, is this rising sort of tide of anxiety here in Ukraine. Some people worried that what Trump actually means is that he would cut off the supply of U.S. weapons, which Ukraine really depends on to defend itself. Other people here worried that Trump would kind of pressure Ukraine into surrendering territory to Russia, perhaps even without any security guarantees, to stop Vladimir Putin doing the same thing all over again. But when it comes down to the mechanics of how you would end the war here, it's really complicated. I mean, Vladimir Putin started this war by invading his neighbor, and it has cost Russia an estimated, hundreds of thousands of casualties. But Vladimir Putin has kind of pinned his legacy on this war. So if he pulls out of Ukraine now, it is a personal humiliation for him. On the other hand, if in any negotiations Russia is allowed to annex parts of Ukraine, there's a real moral hazard there. It sends a message to Russia, to Vladimir Putin, and to like-minded leaders that they can get away with it. I thought it was very interesting yesterday, the day of the inauguration. We also heard from Vladimir Putin, and he said that he is open to dialogue with the new administration about the conflict here in Ukraine.
All right. Holly Williams for us in Kyiv this morning. Thank you, Holly. Appreciate it. Be well. President Trump is promising some significant changes under his administration. Coming up, we're going to take a closer look at what's in store for the Justice Department in his second term. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. I want to take you live now to Capitol Hill, where confirmation hearings for Elise Stefanik, she is President Trump's pick for UN ambassador, is underway. Let's listen.
And security, develop friendly relations among nations based on a shared respect for the principle of equal rights, solve international problems, and harmonize the actions of nations in the attainment of common ends. The UN has not lived up to this founding mission, and we must demand better. It is imperative to ensure strong American leadership at the United Nations. I share President Trump's vision of a UN reformed by strong America first, peace through strength, and a return to this founding mission of promoting peace and security around the world. In closing, I will forever be grateful to my constituents in New York's 21st District for giving me the opportunity to serve them as their voice at the highest levels of Congress. 10 years ago, upstate and North Country voters took a chance on a young, first-time, unknown candidate who very few believed could win. So I just want to thank the hardworking families, small businesses, farms, law enforcement officers, military families, veterans, seniors, so many with whom I've had worked so closely to deliver results on behalf of our communities. Thank you especially to my extraordinarily dedicated staff in both the district and in Washington offices for serving tirelessly for the past decade. If confirmed, my family and I are excited for this next chapter to serve on President Trump's cabinet in this role, and I commit to the American people that I will work my very hardest in the coming years to lead with moral clarity and American values. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Congressman. We appreciate those remarks, and what we're going to do now is we're going to do a round of questions.
All right, you've been listening to the confirmation hearings for Elise Stefanik. She is the president's pick to be the next UN ambassador. There are a couple of hearings that we are tracking throughout the course of the day. Of course, we'll keep you updated right here on CBS News 24/7. Meanwhile, President Trump is getting started on his massive immigration crackdown. Among the slew of executive orders, he is tasking the U.S. military with border enforcement and shut down the asylum and refugee admissions program. The president doubled down on his stance on the border while signing those executive orders at the White House yesterday. Listen.
I'm fine with legal immigration. I like it. We need people, and I'm absolutely fine with it. We want to have it. We need it because we're going to have a lot of companies coming in to avoid tariffs. You know, if you don't want tariffs, all you have to do is build your plant in the U.S., so we're going to have a lot of workers coming in.
All right, CBS News correspondent Omar Villafranca has more on the border policies that are unfolding right now.
Just after the inauguration, President Trump took pen to paper and started signing executive orders reshaping federal policy, especially when it comes to immigration and border security. He also revived some policies that were rolled back during the Biden administration and announced new crackdowns when it comes to immigrants in the United States. Now, one of the first things he did, the new administration shuttered a Biden-era app used by asylum seekers to book appointments with immigration officials, and they also canceled all the outstanding bookings made on the app. About 30,000 migrants were waiting to enter through the CBP One app. Sources also tell CBS News Trump is also planning to ramp up operations to arrest unauthorized immigrants across major U.S. cities this week as he pledges to oversee the largest deportation effort in U.S. history. Trump also signed orders to keep asylum seekers in Mexico while awaiting immigration hearings, and he also labeled drug cartels as terrorist organizations and also promised to send troops to the southern border. Now, troops from the Texas National Guard are already here on the Texas-Mexico border, and they have been since 2021 as part of Operation Lone Star. Another thing the president did is he also signed an executive order challenging birthright citizenship for children born in the U.S. to unauthorized migrants in the country, and that has already been challenged immediately. Back to you.
All right, Omar, thank you. The Department of Justice is already experiencing sweeping changes under the Trump administration. The president has issued an executive order that takes aim at what he calls the weaponization of that department. I want to bring in CBS News Homeland Security and Justice reporter Nicole Skanga. Nicole, among those orders aimed at the Justice Department, what sort of stands out to you?
Yeah, the one you mentioned, Vlad, stood out to me. That executive order that aims to end what's called the weaponization of the federal government. And it's a little bit vague in its wording, but what it does is it directs the U.S. Attorney General and the Director of the National Intelligence to review what it calls potential misconduct within the Justice Department, the SEC, the Federal Trade Commission, and the broader intelligence community that may have occurred in the last 4 years. Another one, with a stroke of a pen, the president also revoked the security clearances of 51 former intelligence officials who had signed a 2020 letter arguing that emails from a laptop belonging to Hunter Biden carried the, quote, earmarks of Russian information operations, plus that of his former national security advisor, John Bolton. Perhaps a little retribution there. Trump, also ordering his administration to delay enforcing that federal ban against TikTok, giving, the app's Chinese parent company, buying them a little more time to broker a deal with a potential American buyer. Of course, the president can't unilaterally overturn a law that was passed by Congress and then later affirmed in the courts. So we do expect that one to face a little little legal scrutiny. The president also signing an order to officially recognize only two sexes, male, female, directing agencies to issue government documents showing people's sex at conception and to stop using gender identity or preferred pronouns. Lastly, Vlad, we have to mention, we've been talking about it all morning, the legal consequences of the largest criminal probe in American history, now virtually undone, with the pardoning of roughly 1,500 January 6 defendants and commutations of the sentences of about 14 more. Among those granted clemency, Enrique Tarrio, the former leader of the Proud Boys, convicted of seditious conspiracy in connection to that Capitol attack. And Vlad, it's worth noting that our team on the ground in Washington spotted a group of Proud Boys marching through the streets yesterday. About 30 men, they were chanting, "We are back, we are back."
Yeah, a colleague of ours, Nicole, this morning told me that while they were getting ready to leave Washington yesterday, they encountered some of those Proud Boys at Union Station in Washington, D.C., really troubling. Meanwhile, let's talk about the president's potential attorney general, Pam Bondi. She had a confirmation hearing last week. She was actually asked about the January 6 potential pardons. She's not going to have to deal with that now, but so what do we expect for her in the next couple of days? What is the expectation of her confirmation?
Yeah, Vlad, so many of the things she was asked about, we've already seen action on. We do await a vote of Pam Bondi out of the Senate Judiciary Committee, but that's expected, as is her confirmation, really, as Attorney General. She'll likely face very few hurdles, given, the Senate Republican majority. She's considered to be one of perhaps the more mainstream candidates. Now, as for what she'll do next, she has said her focus will be on reducing crime, upholding the law. In her confirmation hearing, she really described her goals as getting back to the basics of, combating crime. She mentioned reducing recidivism and criminal justice reform. If she is confirmed, though, she'll lead a department and will have the power to look into various aspects of investigations into President Trump, some led by special counsel Jack Smith. She'll oversee a number of law enforcement components, of course, the FBI and the ATF. Plus, she will defend this administration's perhaps more notably, she'll defend this administration's decisions in court and their policies as well. Vlad?
All right, Nicole, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Following his return to the White House, President Trump signed off on dozens of executive orders, some impacting foreign policy and climate change, prompting reaction from around the world. CBS News reporter Haley Ott has more from London.
In his inaugural address, President Trump outlined a number of policies that would significantly change America's relationship with the rest of the world. And the world is reacting. The president immediately ordered the U.S.'s withdrawal from both the World Health Organization and the Paris Climate Agreement. The WHO is the UN agency responsible for global public health, and among other things, it plays a leading role in coordinating responses to disease outbreaks. Its director general expressed his regret at Mr. Trump's move, urging the president to reconsider for the, quote, benefit of the health and well-being of millions of people around the globe. And Germany's health minister was quoted today as saying that Berlin would try to convince the president to change his mind, while a spokesman for China's foreign ministry said the role of the WHO should be strengthened rather than weakened. As far as the Paris Climate Agreement is concerned, there's been a lot of negative international reaction to Mr. Trump's move to exit the pact. One UN climate change executive said competitor economies with the U.S. will now hoover up jobs and wealth generated by clean energy development, while climate disasters like wildfires and droughts are only getting worse. And here in Europe, EU officials wished Mr. Trump the best, but my sources are telling me that there's what they called unusual fear in Brussels over possible tariffs and what may be coming next. Back to you.
Haley, thank you very much. Firefighters in Southern California are working to contain two brush fires that broke out in northern San Diego County this morning. Both have burned roughly through 50 acres, the two largest fires. The Palisades and Eaton fires are now mostly under control, but crews this morning are bracing for extreme winds and an increased risk for those fires. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with another look at the national forecast. Hey, Grant.
Hey, Vlad, we're going to get to those wildfires and those fire conditions across Southern California here in just a second. I want to talk about the really cold air that's in place across, honestly, the majority of the country. This cold Arctic air has really locked into portions of the Midwestern states this morning. Look at International Falls, Minnesota, 24 degrees, below zero. That's the actual temperature. You factor in a 5 to 10 mile per hour wind. Temperatures in northern Minnesota right now feel like anywhere between 30 to 40, if not closer to 50 degrees colder than normal. I mentioned a good portion of the country. Look at this map over here. This is showing all of the areas across the country that are either under a cold weather advisory or an extreme cold warning. 229 people right now, all in the same boat, feeling very cold, certainly colder than normal. Look at these current temperatures across the rest of the country. Tampa even at 50. I mean, that's relatively mild, but look at Cincinnati, 12, feels like 1 below. Minneapolis is 15 below zero, feeling like 31 degrees below zero with those wind speeds. Those temperatures running well below normal across the eastern half of the United States today into tomorrow. Their temperatures there around Detroit, around 14 degrees for your high tomorrow afternoon. All of that Arctic air is why we've got snow, and not just snow, but we've got blowing blizzard conditions in places I've never seen this before. Southern Louisiana, blizzard warnings in effect. You've got winter storm warnings in effect all across the southeast up into the Carolinas, where some places from Louisiana into the panhandle of Florida could see 4 to 6 inches of snow. New Orleans could actually see closer to 7 to 8 inches of snow. Crippling winter conditions across the South over the next couple of days. Meanwhile, we've got extreme weather concerns across Southern California today, all the way into San Diego County this afternoon, where those wind speeds are beginning to increase once again. Those humidity values are very low, a particularly dangerous situation with this red flag warning in effect for the next couple of days as those winds begin to increase out of the north and east once again. Wind gusts today, 40 to maybe even 50 miles per hour up towards Santa Clarita. As we go into tomorrow, maybe a little bit weaker, but still a concern with some gusty winds. As we make our way into Thursday, those winds will finally begin to decrease after Thursday. So it looks like Thursday afternoon, gusts potentially at 40 to 50 miles per hour, and then dying down as we go into Friday. Fly back to you.
Thank you very much, Grant. Appreciate it. Along with the centuries-old traditions, we did see some unusual moments during President Trump's inauguration yesterday. More on those meme-worthy images. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. You're looking at live pictures from the National Cathedral. Soon, President Trump will arrive there for a national prayer service. We've already seen House Speaker Mike Johnson and that pastor from Detroit who gave one of the prayers yesterday. From the last-minute event changes due to the frigid cold temperatures to the close-up encounters between political rivals. Speaking of that pastor who delivered those remarks yesterday, the presidential inauguration of Donald Trump deviated from the norm and broke several traditions. I want to bring in CBS News political reporter Olivia Rinaldi to talk about some of the things that we saw. I was just sort of chuckling to myself about that pastor yesterday, Olivia, who basically cribbed Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech from his appearance on the National Mall in 1963. And I was gauging reaction on social media. It felt like as if a lot of people had never heard that speech before, given the fact that they talked about the revelatory aspects of it. But give me a sense of some of the things that have come out and that stood out to you over the course of yesterday, beginning with the tradition of swearing the oath of office on a Bible, of course, which stretches all the way back to George Washington. Not every president has ever done it. Why did President Trump choose not to do it?
Yeah, Vlad, it's good to be with you. A lot of things standing out to people yesterday, particularly about Trump not putting his hand on the Bible when he took that oath of office. It's actually interesting. There is no law requiring, and it's not in the Constitution, no requirement that an incoming president or anyone being sworn in has to put their hand on something when they are taking that oath. They just have to raise their right hand and make that oath. Now, obviously, yesterday, what's interesting is that the program was running a little bit behind. The Constitution does require a president to be sworn in by noon on January 20th, and we were at about 12:01. So for about a minute, we didn't have any leadership there. So when Chief Justice John Roberts stood up, he got right into the oath, and Trump stood up and started giving it. Melania had not exactly made her way over to Trump yet. So perhaps that is some of the reasoning why he didn't put his hand specifically on those Bibles. But as you mentioned, there are several presidents in history who have not done that, including Teddy Roosevelt, who is a personal hero of Trump. So perhaps that explains why he did not put his hand on those two Bibles yesterday as he was taking that oath.
And if my presidential memory serves me well, I believe John Quincy Adams also did not put his hand on the Bible, used a book of law. But what were some of the most notable moments there in the Capitol Rotunda for you, including just seeing all living presidents there, all the public figures, all of those tech oligarchs standing up there with the president? Meanwhile, some members of Congress and governors were in a waiting room, like Ron DeSantis.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. An inauguration like we've never seen before. As you mentioned, there were a lot of tech billionaires within that building, sitting right next to Supreme Court justices, sitting next to other notable figures in government, Trump's incoming cabinet. We saw Mark Zuckerberg. We saw Jeff Bezos and his fiancée, Lauren Sanchez. We also saw the leader of TikTok. And of course, we saw Elon Musk, who has not been far from wherever Donald Trump has been over the last 2 months, all there in that building. I also noticed on social media last night that the likes of some TikTokers like Logan Paul, Jake Paul, Theo Vaughn, people who are famous on social media for that youth outreach that Trump has talked about so often, were also in the Capitol yesterday, talking about how close some people can really get to this new president. That was quite notable to me there.
All right, Olivia Rinaldi for us. Thank you, Olivia. Appreciate it. We're going to have much more news. Just stay with us. You're watching CBS News 24/7. After President Trump's inauguration and a busy day of executive actions, he had a long night of celebrating. Trump and First Lady Melania Trump attended several inaugural balls. CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman was at one of those events, the Commander-in-Chief Ball.
It was a night of pomp and lots of circumstance.
It's a celebration because we're going to turn our country around. We're going to make America great again.
President Trump, First Lady Melania Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and his wife Usha Vance attended 3 official inaugural balls, celebrating the 47th president's return to power.
We are a great nation. We will soon be the greatest we've ever been, and that won't take long.
Mrs. Trump dazzled in a black and white gown designed by her stylist, Herve Pierre, while the president showed off his dance moves to what has become a campaign classic. Inaugural balls are hot-ticket events, and the tradition dates back to the early 19th century, with many of the soirees including special moments like this. The first couple spent part of their evening here at the Commander-in-Chief Ball, aimed at honoring members of the armed services, where Rascal Flatts performed. Baby blue eyes, your head on my shoulder. And while the cold weather kept most of the inaugural events inside, rapper Nelly aimed to turn up the heat indoors at the Liberty Ball.
My performance is definitely for the office. I feel honored that I've been asked.
For CBS Mornings, I'm Willie James Inman.
All right, let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Grant Gilmore with the final look at the national forecast. Hey, Grant.
Hey, Vlad, locked into that cold Arctic air across the northern tier states. Minneapolis right now, 15 below, feeling like 31 degrees below zero. But really the main story is cold Arctic air that has dropped all the way to the northern Gulf of Mexico, meaning we've got snow. Yes, snow in New Orleans this morning, where there are winter storm warnings from really southern Texas all the way into the Carolinas this morning, with blizzard warnings in effect over portions of eastern Texas and southwestern Louisiana. Some places from Louisiana into southern Mississippi could see 4 to 6 inches of snow, and that snow band continues to the north and east all the way into southeastern North Carolina. Meanwhile, we're keeping an eye on fire conditions across Southern California. Extreme fire concerns across from L.A. down into San Diego, where those wind gusts over the next couple days, Vlad, could be between 40 to 50 miles per hour. Back to you.
All right, Grant, thank you very much. That does it for me, folks. Stay right where you are. After the break, Elizabeth Cook is live from San Francisco with all the news breaking from coast to coast. As we go to break, another live picture of the Washington National Cathedral.